sanctions. So I'm not happy with this. I got to tell you.
Carney is getting grilled from Japan. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today, we've got Japanese media criticizing Mark Carney's approach to dealing with Xi Jinping in China. It's all very embarrassing. You've got a panel on CTV. You've got some other stuff. Let's jump into this one here. 2 in 5 Canadians, 41% report being $200 or less away from financial insolvency each month. This is life in Canada now. We got this one from the Japan Times. Japan is not impressed with Mark Carney. Canada undermines its own China engagement. Prime Minister Carney's Tokyo and Seoul flyover sends all the wrong messages. It says here, the art of diplomacy with rising powers demands more than goodwill. It requires strategic literacy, carefully cultivated leverage, and the discipline to sequence engagement properly. Prime Minister Mark Carney is in Beijing this week for a 4-day visit, his first major bilateral engagement in the Indo-Pacific since taking office. Noticeably absent from his itinerary is Tokyo and Seoul. Carney's decision reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how middle powers must engage with Beijing in an era of intensifying great power competition. Goes on to talk about how China's got 70 million person industrial workforce with unmatched process knowledge. This isn't propaganda, it's an observable reality that any Canadian strategy must incorporate. It also goes on to talk about when a middle power leader arrives in Beijing seeking rapprochement, this lens positions the visit in validation of China's strength and vindication and its resistance to Western influence, saying that this essentially Mark Carney's coming here out of a position of weakness. And well, we're in this position of weakness because he didn't get a deal with Donald Trump. And then they're criticizing him now because he's not going to Tokyo or Seoul to essentially get more leverage from the other big democracies that we should be trading with. And what's he doing? He's going to go over to Qatar because Brookfield just went over to Qatar and made a deal back at the beginning of December. And then he's going to go to the WF in Davos. It's clear where his priorities are. It's to enrich himself. He doesn't give a crap about Canadians.
Welcome.
Great honor.
很荣幸见到您，
Thank you very much.
非常感谢你今天见我。It's my pleasure to see you.
Goes on to say here, Canada's policy community has struggled to internalize these realities. The assumption persists that patient dialogue will moderate Chinese behavior and that economic interdependence naturally produces convergence and that Beijing's challenges, demographic decline, real estate troubles, and sluggish competition will force accommodation with Western preferences. It goes on to talk about Canada and India's relationship in China and then just once again revisits Tokyo and Seoul. You know, without consolidated agreements from these major cities, before entering Beijing, meeting room Carney lacks the most basic prerequisites for productive engagement, credible alternatives that limit Chinese leverage. Well, maybe he isn't looking for leverage because he's exactly where he wants to be. And that's the truth of it, sadly.
We're heartened between Canada and China. We're heartened by the leadership of President Xi Jinping and the speed with which our relationship has progressed in recent months.
Carney's Beijing trip, undertaken before visiting Tokyo or Seoul, sends several problematic messages simultaneously to Beijing. The visit suggests eagerness bordering on desperation to restore relations troubled since the unlawful detentions of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. Chinese negotiators schooled in strategic patience will interpret this timing as weakness. This article goes on to just hammer Carney over and over. The productive sequencing would have begun in Tokyo, where Carney would negotiate concrete economic security agreements covering critical minerals, semiconductor cooperation, supply chain resilience, and technology partnerships. Such agreements need not to be framed as anti-China initiatives, but their existence would fundamentally alter the calculus in any subsequent Beijing negotiation by demonstrating that Canada possesses genuine alternatives for market access, investment, and technological partnership. This article just basically says Carney has no idea what he's doing. I think he does know what he's doing, though. He's there for a reason. He's a smart guy. He's not dumb.
This is indeed a very important meeting and the most auspicious start to the new year and to a new era of relations between Canada and China.
Then goes on to say Seoul represents a complementary partner offering advanced manufacturing capabilities and its own complex experience managing relations with both China and North Korea. South Korea's evolution under numerous administrations, from emphasizing economic ties with China to implementing export controls and deepening trilateral cooperation with the US and Japan, illustrates the regional trend Carney should align with rather than resist. With concrete agreements from both Tokyo and Seoul in hand, Carney could then travel to Beijing Beijing from a position of strength, demonstrating through actions rather than rhetoric that Canada has no options and is pursuing them. The negotiation dynamic transforms the supplication to genuine dialogue between parties with mutual interests and also clear alternatives if those relations fail to materialize on acceptable terms.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister, I'm very pleased to meet with you. On behalf of the National People's Congress, I extend a warm welcome to you, Mr. Prime Minister.
Future Canadian leaders and their counterparts in similarly positioned countries must internalize a fundamental lesson. Strategic literacy about great power capabilities must be acquired through sustained allied consultation, not solidarity assessment. Carney's Beijing visit may produce warm atmospherics and positive headlines about re-engagement, but absent the prerequisites of allied coordination and credible alternatives, it represents a strategic setback disguised as diplomatic engagement. The sequencing matters. It always has. This is such a scathing article criticizing Mark Carney, basically saying that he has no idea what he's doing. He's doing this all wrong. He did it in the wrong order, and he's missing the most fundamental part of trade, and that's going to Seoul and Tokyo first before going to China. Calling him out for not knowing what he's doing, but I think he knows what he's doing. He's intentionally doing this. He has one goal, and that's the carbon credit system. So he's going to China for some reason, whether that's getting China on board to bring that over here or some prerequisite in the process. It's not just Japan that's saying that this is the wrong relationship to build here in China. We should be getting a deal with America. Conservative Tony Clement here dropping the truth bombs. And believe it or not, they have two conservatives on this panel. I think this is a first on CTV.
What is your assessment of how things are going so far, and what would you say the political stakes ahead of this big meeting between President Xi and the Prime Minister are?
Well, I don't know where it's going. I mean, I don't really like this fasci. I'll be honest with you. I know the Prime Minister wants to, make other opportunities, not with the United States. I get that. But China is not the right, the Chinese Communist Party is not the right dance partner. They kidnapped two of our citizens. They tried to interfere with our elections. And as the previous speaker was saying, there's a lot of espionage and skullduggery that goes along with dealing with the Chinese Communist Party. So, yeah, there's lots of other choices out there: Japan, Korea, even in Asia, Vietnam, even. But China, I spent most of my time in Stephen Harper's cabinet making sure China didn't take over the oil sands and all of our minerals production. So I'm not happy with this. I got to tell you.
We should be banning China from owning anything in Canada. They want to buy stuff from us. That's fine. They want to buy our products. They shouldn't own anything in Canada.
It's interesting because I was thinking back to that as I was listening, Marco, to the sort of the MOU, the description of the MOU, and I haven't read all the details. I don't know exactly how it's going to materialize, but there appears to be a much bigger opening, particularly where energy is concerned, for additional Chinese investment. I remember covering the big Nexon decision under the Harper government, where it was like a massive deal to approve CNOOC takeover, and the line at the time was, "That's it," right? Since then, we've had a somewhat similar posture, particularly around the oil patch. It felt like a very different signal today. Do you feel like it's a different signal, and what do you think is behind that?
I do think it's a different signal. I think we're living in a different time, and I would say respectfully to Tony, they have been a dance partner. China has. They're our second largest trading partner. And, while I think in a perfect world, we would just be focused on one side of the ledger when it comes to relationships, we have to take a look at the world as we see it right now. And it is different.
Okay, yeah, let's look at it right now. Canada exports by country. United States, 77% of our stuff goes to America. 3.9% goes to China. They love saying China's our second biggest trading partner. It's not even close. The UK's at 3.6. It's nearly number 2. It's clear where we need to be getting a deal. We shouldn't be doing anything to piss off America or Donald Trump. We should be securing this deal right now. But of course, Carney knows that. They all know this. Mark Carney is running a scheme here to get rich.
Look, I think the MOUs specifically are a signal that there is an openness to more economic cooperation. I think the challenge really is going to be to find ways to seek compromise between things like the tariffs that we put in place when it comes to EVs to defend our auto manufacturing sector, whereas we also want to see relief for canola in Saskatchewan. I think it's a good thing that Scott Moe is attending with the Prime Minister. And I think the reality is this, that today trade is really about finding ways to seek alignment on interests as opposed to values.
This guy's really trying to twist the whole situation like a pretzel to make it make sense, and it doesn't make sense. We shouldn't be doing anything other than selling stuff to China, and we shouldn't be selling a lot of stuff in one individual sector. We should be spreading this out across Vietnam, Korea, Thailand, Japan, the Philippines. That way, if China tries to pull this crap on us like they are right now with canola and peas, then it's not that big of a deal. But right now, it is a big deal because we do sell a lot of that stuff to China. This is another failure by the Liberals.
You know what is also strikes me about that? Another thing I was thinking about today, James, was like, it was just a few years ago where the position was friendshoring. Like the approach that countries like ours and ours specifically was going to take to facilitating greater trade, to facilitating more cooperation in the world was through alignment on values versus what Marco and now many other countries are saying too, which is like, we've got to be pragmatic given the threat of Trump. What is your view of that?
Yeah, look, I think given the productivity numbers in Canada and the struggling economy, I think cash shoring is kind of what I think a lot of people are looking for. And exploiting export markets is something I think that's fundamental for Canada. Marco is right. China is Canada's second largest trading partner, and that's not going to change anytime soon. And diversification is important. I think part of the reason why Prime Minister Carney is actually there is for the conversation we're having right now, which is Canadians, as the United States gets more and more belligerent and less trustworthy and less reliable for as far as an export market goes, Canada's going to have to trade with other countries around the world. And there's going to be some tough dialogue that has to happen within this country and some comfort found with some of those markets that we're going to do business with. Some things we will never trade with China. Some things we will not be able to collaborate with in China because of the nature of the way in which the regime deals with the rule of law. But I can tell you that the province of Saskatchewan, that's why Premier Scott Moe is there, they would like to sell a lot more canola there. We would like to have more access to their market. We want to have steady access in terms of LNG. They would buy every drop of LNG we could produce in British Columbia, I can tell you, and get it into those Chinese markets. So there are certain commodities and certain opportunities within China that are specific and unique to that market that we should be pursuing and should have access to. But a broader trading relationship, I think we shouldn't look to just one country, but we should have greater diversification. And the good news is for Canada is that we are the only country in the world that has tariff-free access to more than 52% of the global economy. We're the only country in the world that's a member of CUSMA, but also the Canada-Europe Free Trade, Canada-South Korea Free Trade, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So, going market to market on commodity to commodity, deal by deal basis, that's going to become more of what the job of the Prime Minister is going to be. And I think today is part of that. And there can be a lot more of this as I think, standard operating procedure for Canada's Prime Minister, whoever that is, on a go-forward basis.
It's unfortunate. I think James here is really naive. He doesn't really realize what's going on, what Carney's doing. He's rolling out net zero agenda. He's getting Xi Jinping on board because they have the biggest carbon credit system over there. He's living up a little bit in the clouds as if Mark Carney's trying to run our country in a positive manner that's good for us. He's not doing that. Going back to Scott Moe, the reason Scott Moe's there is obviously to fight for Saskatchewan, but is also to keep an eye on Carney. That's why yesterday's press conference, his head snapped over when Carney said New World Order. Hey, look at Scott Moe's reaction here.
The progress that we have made in the partnership sets us up well for the New World Order.
He's like, wait, what? What did you just say? Originally, when I played this, I cut out all the spaces because he's speaking really slow for the translators to make sure they get the words very accurate, but it made it so long and obnoxious to watch. But I mean, him coming out and saying New World Order, and Scott Moe's like, whoa, what are we doing here? So we've got Keenan Bexley from Juno News here reaching out to Premier Scott Moe's office, asking if they want to comment on this, to seeing if he condones the comments that he was nodding to there. He was nodding before, and then he did the quick take when Carney said that. Scott Moe will continue to advocate for the best possible outcomes for Canada and Saskatchewan when it comes to trade between the two countries. Premier Scott Moe does not vet the Prime Minister's comments. So yeah, Scott Moe did not realize what was going on there. Is
there a way to kind of have it all, though, with China? And even using the example of canola, right? Like, as we try and secure more market access, if it were for canola, I mean, that is what China picked to hit us back on in response to the EV tariffs, because that sector is so vulnerable to China, just as it was in 2018 when they levied other tariffs on the same sector. Christy?
Well, okay, first, we heard Ambassador Hoekstra say recently, well, we don't really need Canada. So we've got the United States saying they don't need us, they don't want to trade with us, we're not relevant to them. And then we think that we shouldn't start trading with other countries that also with whom we also have serious disagreements. I'm not sure that the way the Americans have treated, it seems to me like the way the Americans have been treating Canada would suggest that we should not be conducting our relationships with countries based on the fact that we share the same values, that we visit a lot, that we have a lot of family across the borders. We should be making those decisions based on where Canada's economic interest really lies. Now, there are issues here, like Jimmy Lai, for example, and other Canadians or people highly connected to Canada who've been detained in China. Those issues remain. But, you know, when we were in really tough times in British Columbia, I mean, I did a lot of trade missions to China, and I'll tell you, they were the ones that invested in all of their three major oil companies invested in Canada in LNG. They saved our forest industry when the Americans had threatened it really profoundly with their tariff changes that they'd made. So
I'm not surprised Christy Clark here defending China. I mean, she's so wrapped up in it. She is so integrated in China. She's just another one of these liberals like Chrétien, has no problem doing a deal with the devil.
This is really important for Canada, and I would say as a Western Canadian, the question isn't just should we be trading with China, because I think that's a gimme. They are the, you know, when you live on the West Coast, you see how much closer they are than trading with Germany, as an example. But the question is also, is the government going to choose EVs in Ontario in a market that's highly subsidized, producing cars that are very expensive, where there's very little trust that they'll be charging infrastructure, or are they going to choose canola, which contributes $40 billion or something like that to the Canadian economy in Western Canada, which has a well understood supply chain, lots of customers, and we know is going to continue without much government subsidy to be able to grow the Canadian economy. To me, that is just as important a question about whether or not we decide we want to trade with China, because I think it's an absolute gimme that we should be doing that.
Well, I don't like Christy Clark. She's right there. The question with EVs, Doug Ford's coming out and saying, yeah, let's have China come in and build them, have their own facilities, build BYD, Huawei, whatever vehicles in Ontario, when really that's just the same thing we did before, except China's involved, throwing tons of monies into EVs, bankrupting Canadians. Meanwhile, we have an actual industry in the canola industry, which makes billions of dollars that needs to be addressed now. We've also got an update to this story where it was a realtor had shown a place to a guy twice, and the second time he tried to thrust himself upon her and SA her. She pulled out a knife, defended herself, and the guy perished. We have a bit of updates on this now. The police are fully backing her and what she did to protect herself.
The autopsy was conducted today, which identified the man as 48-year-old Shahbaz Ahmed. As investigators have determined that the woman was acting in self-defense, Ahmed's death has been deemed not a non-culpable homicide, and no charges will be laid in the incident. An incident of this nature is extremely rare and deeply unsettling for the victim, her family, and all Calgarians. The victim's actions undoubtedly saved her life, and our thoughts are with her as she continues to recover. To protect the privacy of the victim, no further details will be released. I can say that in my experience in the homicide unit, this is easily the most clear-cut case of self-defense that I have ever been involved in.
This is great news. So no charges being laid against her. She saved her own life, and now she saved the community against Shahbaz Ahmed from attacking anyone else. The question I have is, how long has Shahbaz Ahmed been in Canada? Was he born here? Did he come here just last year? I would like some more details on this.